Hi, I'm Chef Jennifer Basil, and thank you for joining me this season as we make some Italian American classic dishes. We've been learning how dishes from Italy translated here in America, and today we're going to go to two other locations. We're going to go to San Francisco and make cioppino, a fish stew, and we're going to go to Chicago and make their classic Italian beef sandwich. So stay tuned and we'll learn how to put those recipes together. So let's start today making a classic Italian American dish that hails from San Francisco. We're gonna make cioppino, which is a fish stew. Everything we're gonna do is in a sauce pot on the stovetop, so let's work our way over there. So cioppino is a fish stew that started in San Francisco, and the fishermen would go off the wharf, they would see what their catch of the day was, and whatever was left over is what they would make their stew with. Today we're gonna cook with some mussels, clams, and shrimp. You can put whitefish in it. Sometimes there's crab in it. But for today, we're gonna stick with those three shellfish. I guess they're all shellfish, even though my shrimp is shelled. All right, so to start, we are going to put some olive oil in our pan. Got that hot. And the first thing I wanna do is sweat our vegetables. So for this particular recipe, I'm going to use some fennel. And in place of onions, we're using leek. And same technique, we want to just get that swirled around in the olive oil and let the heat, medium low, kind of soften those. And once that's softened, we're going to deglaze it with some white wine. I bet you thought I was going to drink this because it's in a wine glass, but no, this is actually going to go in our stew. So we will deglaze the pan. All right, our vegetables have sweat down, they've become translucent and soft. We're going to deglaze the pan with some white wine. When you cook with white wine, make sure that you're actually cooking with a wine that you would drink, because the alcohol cooks off of it, but the flavors from the wine remain. That's why you do cook with spirits or alcohol. So I wouldn't use a wine that you would never drink by itself in your dish, because then your dish won't taste good. So now that we've got that, we'll add our fish stock and we'll add our San Marzano tomatoes. So I've got the San Marzano tomatoes. I'm gonna crush those by hand. You could puree them. If you did a puree, I would still add a diced tomato because you want some texture in your stew. But if you do it by hand this way with the plum tomatoes, you get a nice texture, almost like a dice, but it adds some depth to your sauce. So we'll put that in. Let me wipe my hand off. And then we've got some fish stock. You can buy store-bought fish stock or you can make it yourself. So if you cook seafood early in the week and you have shells from your shrimp or shells from lobster or anything like that, you can make your own stock, or you can just buy it at the store. And we want to go ahead and add our herbs and let this simmer for about 20-25 minutes to really meld all those flavors together before we put our shellfish in. The shellfish isn't going to take very long, so we don't want to put it in now because then it'll overcook. So we are going to add some celery leaf, parsley, garlic, oregano, chopped basil, and this can be a spicy dish if you prefer, so depending on your heat tolerance and how spicy you like your food, some crushed red pepper flakes. Let that simmer for about 20-25 minutes. We will then taste it for the salt content before we add some salt and pepper, and we'll be ready to throw our seafood in. So our broth for the stew has been simmering. All those flavors have come together. Now we're ready to do our shellfish. I've got little neck clams, I've got mussels, and I've got shrimp. Now, this dish, we're gonna cook the clams and the mussels in the shell. The shrimp, however, have been peeled and deveined. I'm not a fan of putting my hands in soup or gravy or anything like that to have to work to eat my food. So those are enough for me to have to work for. So the first thing we're gonna put in is the clams, because they take probably about 4 to 5 minutes longer than the mussels to open up. So you're looking for clams that are shut. We'll get those in. We'll let those simmer for about 5 minutes, and then we'll throw the mussels in. The shrimp will be the last thing we put in because the shrimp really only take about 3 to 4 minutes. So we put our clams in first, our mussels in second, our shrimp. This is only gonna take a few minutes to finish. My sister actually lives in San Francisco. This is her favorite dish, so I'm excited to make it and share it with you. So just a few more minutes and we'll be ready to serve it. So our fish stew, our cioppino, is ready. This is perfect for a cold winter night as our temperatures change. Look at how beautiful that is. You wanna get a nice serving bowl, and you wanna make sure you get a lot of that juice. And serving it with a nice crusty bread to sop up that sauce is just perfect. You can see the clams have opened up, the mussels have opened up. It is a fantastic dish. I'm gonna put a little bit of torn basil on it. It adds a little color and a little flavor. And since it's fresh herbs, it'll soften up in the hot broth. And let's finish it off. Let's make it pretty, Jennifer style. Isn't that beautiful? Cioppino from San Francisco. Moving on to another area of the United States where Italian Americans adapted to American product, we are going to make an Italian beef sandwich from Chicago. We are going to start by browning some meat. We're going to braise it off. This takes about a 3 to 3.5 hour process. You could use a pressure cooker and knock it down to 35 minutes, or even your Instapot would make it go quicker. But we're going to do it the classic way. We're going to braise it slowly in the oven, and then we're going to take it out. We're going to make our sandwich toppings, get those ready, and a wonderful gravy to accompany it. So for this recipe, you'll want to use a rump roast or a bottom round or a top round. You can either shred the meat or slice it for your sandwich. But the first thing we want to do is make sure that we season it well. We're going to brown it on the stovetop, and then we're going to get our braising liquid ready and put it in the oven. So to season the outside of our meat, we're going to do garlic powder, oregano, basil, and parsley. I'm going to go ahead and add salt and pepper to that and mix it all together. And then we'll do this as a dry rub on the outside of our roast. So we just really want to pack that on there and get a lot of flavor. And this will help season the broth as well, which will end up being our gravy. Let's take this over and get it browned on the stovetop and get this in the oven so it can start braising. So whenever you braise a meat, you always want to brown it first and get that nice golden crust. That's also going to help keep the juices in the meat as it cooks. So I'm going to start with a Dutch oven, and we'll put our olive oil in it. Let that get hot for just a second. And we're going to put our meat in that's been seasoned. We've got that nice herb rub on it, which is going to add flavor to our gravy. And we will get this seared off. You can hear that sizzle. And this will just take a minute. We want to get it brown on all sides, and then we'll add our gravy ingredients, which is going to be beef broth. I've got an Italian salad dressing seasoning. So not Italian seasoning, but the salad dressing mix. We're going to throw that in with some bay leaves, and I like to throw pepperoncinis in just to add a little bit of acidity and some tartness to our au jus as well. So we're getting a nice sear on the edge of this. So this dish actually in Chicago started, they say, in the stockyards. So people would be working in the stockyards, they needed a sandwich that was flavorful. They didn't have great cuts of meat, so they used more tougher cuts of meat, which is why we're gonna slow braise this, because those not so tender, not so fatty cuts of meat still have wonderful flavor and are totally edible. But the key to cooking those is to slow roast them till they become tender and kind of fall apart. So that's how this dish started in Chicago. And then of course you've got your famous places where everyone agrees that the Italian beef sandwich in Chicago is like the best sandwich ever, but there's definitely argument over which restaurant or which establishment has the best one. All right, you can kind of see we've got a nice brown on the edge of that. Can you see that? All right, so let's get this braising. We're gonna add our beef stock. I always do unsalted. You can always add the salt after and to your taste. But as this reduces a little bit too, you don't want it to become too salty. So I always start with unsalted. We're gonna toss in the pepperoncini with some of the juice from that, our salad dressing seasoning, and some bay leaf. And let me just give that a quick stir. So now that we've got our gravy mixed, our meat is seared, and our broth is ready to go in the oven. Let's cover it. We're gonna put it in the oven at 300 degrees for at least 3.5, almost 4 hours. So Italian beef sandwiches are typically topped with a giardiniera or with sweet peppers or both. So to get our sweet peppers ready, we're using just a green bell pepper, a nice mild pepper. We're gonna just saute that with a little salt and pepper, and then I'm gonna add a little red wine vinegar, which is gonna add some flavor to it. If you've ever had like sausage with peppers and onions and you're like, why don't my sausage and peppers, the peppers and the onions taste that way? They put vinegar on it. So that's just a little trick to bring out some flavor in your peppers. And cooking this will also make them a little bit, it'll pull out that sweetness so they won't be so bitter. So coat the bottom of your pan, make sure that it's warm. Throw those in. We'll let those get soft. We don't want them soggy, we don't want them brown. We're not trying to make fajita peppers here. So we're just gonna let that saute a little bit. We'll drizzle them with a little bit of the red wine vinegar. And that'll also keep them from getting too brown if you put the vinegar in, because you've got a little liquid in there. A little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. And as soon as these are softened, we've got our topping ready to make our sandwiches. Okay, our meat has been braising for about 4 hours, so I think we're ready to put our sandwich together. We've got our sweet peppers, we've got our giardiniera, and we'll get some jus ready as well once we pull this out. Beautiful. So like I said, you can either shred this meat or you can slice it. So let's take the meat out. We're gonna make some slices for our sandwich. I've got some French bread here. You can use a hoagie roll, whatever soft kind of bread that you wanna use. You don't want something too crunchy, just because you don't wanna have that like hurt the roof of your mouth. I hate that when I bite into something that like scrapes the roof of my mouth. So let's get this sliced. Oh, fall apart. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Now for the gravy, this juice, you can strain it. You can put it on the oven if it's not thick enough, if you want to make it a little bit thicker, and just let it boil down till it becomes like a gravy. Oh my goodness. Looks so good. Who doesn't like roast beef? All right. So the first thing that we're gonna do is take our bread. Let's put our roast beef in it. We're gonna add our sweet peppers that we sauteed and softened in the vinegar. And then we're gonna add giardiniera, which is just a pickled vegetable mix. And this is an Italian beef sandwich. Now, there's two ways you can eat this. So one is dry. So for a dry sandwich, we'll take half of this. You could serve this with a side of the jus, just as it came out of the oven, and you can dip it like you would, you know, another dip sandwich. So that's one way you can serve it. The other way, which is if you ordered it wet, and this is how they typically eat it in Chicago, is to take the sandwich, have a sandwich wrapper. You're actually gonna dip this in the gravy. So you get a nice, moist, wet bun. And that is the Italian beef sandwich served wet. Get that wrapped so it holds in the juice. And you'd eat it just like this. I hope you had as much fun today as I did as we went to San Francisco and Chicago and learned that Italian food really is loved in America all the way across the country. We did the cioppino, which was the fish stew from San Francisco, and we made the classic Italian beef sandwich. For those recipes, please go to my website, jenniferbasil.com.